Great. Hi, everyone. It is 4:59 p.m. and we'll be starting at 5 o'clock, so just hang on for another minute as we let some more people come in. All right, if everyone's ready, then it's time for us to get started. So welcome to the first week of World Geography. Today we'll be learning about physical and human geography, which is just going to give you the basics of what the World Geography course is about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so this is Unit 1, Physical and Human Geography. So we're going to start with an overview, which is just that we're going to cover aspects such as landforms, climate, systems of the earth, and the human geography unit will cover urban geography, economic geography, cultural, political, social, and population geography, all the things that are important for understanding how the people of the world work. So let's continue. So this is how I would suggest you work through world geography, and this is how we're going to work through world geography as well. So I like to use the acronym ESPN, which is what you should use whenever you're analyzing any event, which is E for economic, S for social, P for political, and the N at the end is for environmental. So make sure to keep that in mind when you're going through any sort of event at all, and when you're writing anything in geography, look through these and make sure you're covering all of them when you're working through an assignment. So these are the four things we're going to be going over today. Number 1 will be Earth essentials. Number 2 is land and climate, which is part of physical geography. And then the last two are part of human geography, which will be politics and people, and then the economics and the social aspects of the world. We're going to do a little bit of practice, and you're also going to get a lot of definitions. So be sure to ask any questions if you have any problems at all, and I can answer them. All right, so part 1 is Earth essentials. First, we're going to learn about latitude and longitude. So I already have the definitions here. So latitude is a geographic coordinate that specifies the north-south position of a point on the Earth's surface. In the next slide, we're going to see a diagram that shows you exactly what it looks like on a map. And longitude will be the east-west, so it'll be horizontal. Okay. I see that someone has raised their hand if you'd like to ask a question. As for questions, you can send them in the Q&A and I can answer them, or you can raise your hand and I will allow you to ask a question. Right? Make sure to keep that hand raised for a little bit if you want to ask a question. Here is the diagram that shows you lines of latitude and lines of longitude. So you might have heard of the equator, and we know the equator is the hottest, is a very, very hot part of the Earth. And once you get closer to the equator, the climate of the area tends to get hotter. And we'll learn about that in just a minute, about why that happens. So lines of latitude are all, as we see here, horizontal. So they go from east to west, and longitude is from north to south. And so that central line at 0 degrees in lines of longitude would be called the prime meridian. So that's right there in the center, the prime meridian. So obviously these are what are going to be causing day and night. I'm sure you guys know this, but day and night are due to the Earth rotating on its axis, not its orbit around the sun. So the term one day is determined by the time the Earth takes to rotate once on its axis and includes both daytime and nighttime. And you can see here in this diagram, you can see the sun's rays, and this one half of the Earth, one hemisphere of the Earth is going to be in day, while the other part is going to be in night. All right, I see there is a question. Okay. And equinox and solstices. Now this might be a little less familiar than a day and night. So equinoxes and solstices are caused by Earth's tilt on its axis and its motion in orbit. So an equinox is sort of happening on the imaginary sort of dome of our sky, or is an event that happens in the Earth's orbit around the sun. So equinoxes and solstices are what help us determine our seasons. So the March equinox, you would say, that's the spring. December solstice would be winter solstice. September equinox is the autumnal equinox, and the June solstice would be the summer solstice. And as for December solstice, that is usually the shortest day of the year, while the June solstice, the summer solstice, is the longest day of the year, and the March and September equinox, the spring and fall equinox are exactly equal in day and night, the amount of daylight and the amount of nighttime there is. Make sure to keep that hand raised. If you have a question, keep it up for just a little bit so I can find you in the participants and allow you to speak. All right, so here is where we see some more specifics on latitude and longitude, specifically latitude. So here is north and south. 66.33 degrees is one of the really, really big numbers when you're talking about latitude. So direct sunlight, as we see here in the diagram, comes from the sun. You have the Arctic Circle all the way at the top, Antarctic Circle at the bottom, the equator in the middle, and the Tropic of Cancer above the equator, and the Tropic of Capricorn below the equator. So these tropics are going to be at 66.33 degrees. From the equator north and from the equator south. And we can see in the diagram, this is specified as the June solstice. So on the summer solstice, this is how the Earth looks. This is how much of light is shining on the Tropic of Cancer and the equator, as well as the Tropic of Capricorn and the Arctic and Antarctic circles. And you see here, December solstice, it's tilted in the other direction. So the southern hemisphere gets more light than the northern hemisphere. And in the March or September equinox, you see it's exactly equal, perfectly straight. Tropics are just extra, they're just lines of latitude that allow you to navigate the world better and navigate the lines of latitude better. So they allow you to talk about weather and climate, and we're going to see that a little bit later on about what exactly they mean for weather and climate, what exactly they mean for landforms and physical geography. All right. Are there any questions on lines of latitude, longitude, any of these Earth essentials before we continue? All right, any questions in the chat, you can raise your hand or you can even send it in the Q&A and I can answer them. Is there nothing? All right. So while I'm on this slide, quick quiz. Is the Tropic of Cancer below or above the equator? You can go ahead and answer that in the chat, raise your hand, or send it in the Q&A. One answer, I got a couple answers in the chat. All right, that's correct. The Tropic of Cancer is above the equator. And is the prime meridian a line of latitude or a line of longitude? That's correct. It is longitude. Oh, I got some people saying latitude. So what I like to remember when I'm trying to tell the difference between latitude and longitude is lat and flat. So latitude is the east to west, so the flat horizontal line, and longitude is the vertical line. And the line of latitude at 0 degrees is the equator, and longitude would be the prime meridian. Good job, guys. Now we can go on to types of maps. So now when you're looking at world geography, you're going to see a lot of maps. Everything in geography is about maps. So it's important to be able to tell what are the different types of maps, what they show you, what they're good at, and what's not so good about them. What are some limitations on those types of maps? So there are three main ones that we're going to look at, and the first one of those is the Mercator projection, the Mercator map. So this shows the correct shapes of the continents and the directions accurately, but one big disadvantage is that the Mercator map projection does not show any true distances or any size of continents, especially near the North and South poles. And sailors usually use a Mercator map to navigate. Now, here's something that I encourage you to do when you get home. One of the continents or one of the land masses that really is telling about the different types of maps and how the sizes and the distances may change is Greenland and Australia. So when you go home or even right now, just take note of the size and shape relatively of Greenland and Australia and see how they change between all the different maps. Here's the equal area projection, probably one that you've seen a lot, and it shows the correct sizes of land masses and continents, but it causes the shapes of land masses to be altered and forced into curves. And you see how Australia is a little bit scrunched and Greenland looks very, very narrow at the top of the map. And researchers often use these equal area projections or equal area maps to compare land sizes of the world. So it is useful for showing the size of land masses and continents. And lastly is the Robinson projection. This one is most commonly used by, as you see here, students, teachers, textbooks, and atlases. So one really good thing about the Robinson map projection, it shows most distances, sizes, and shapes accurately, but it has a little bit of distortion around the poles and edges. So as you see here on Greenland and Australia, and we'll go back a couple slides so you can compare them. You notice how it's much narrower here, and in this one it's much wider compared to this Robinson projection. And obviously, when we're looking at maps, the most reliable form is going to be a globe. So whenever, if possible, if you want to look at a map, if you want to find any locations on a map, use a globe. It's really, really helpful, and it's probably going to give you the best results. All right. Any questions on types of maps, what they're good for, what are the differences, what are the limitations? Any questions at all? You can raise your hand, use the chat, or use Q&A. I don't see any questions, so we can go ahead and move on. The second part is land and climate. So land and climate are really big parts of physical geography. And to understand physical geography and why these countries and why these continents are shaped the way that they're shaped, you have to understand landforms and climate and plate tectonics. So we're going to go into that right now. It's the most sciencey part of geography that we're going to get into. So when you're looking at physical geography, here are some 5 themes of geography, of which 4 are going to be mainly physical geography. So location is, where is it? What is its absolute location? And what is its relative location? So an absolute location would be its location on a map, and you would a location on a map and its coordinates. So you would say such and such degrees north and such degrees east relative to the equator and the prime meridian, and its relative location would be, oh, it's in the south part of Texas, or it is in the north part of Canada. Place is, what is it like there? So what are its natural characteristics and what are its human characteristics? So natural characteristics and human characteristics are, as you can see, physical and human geography respectively. So natural characteristics would be things like, how is the place shaped? What is the weather like there? What is the climate? And human characteristics would be like, what is the population, the economics, what's the government like in that country? Human environment interaction is also part of human geography. We can go ahead and go over that right now. So how have people used the environment, which would be things like us using natural resources for things like gasoline and like powering factories, and how have people adapted to the environment when people move to new countries from a hot place to a cold place? How have we adapted to those different climates, and how have people modified or changed the environment, such as building trees, factories, buildings? The fourth theme of geography is movement. So how is this place connected to other places? So how and why have people, goods, and ideas moved in and out of the place? And here we'll be looking at things like manufacturing, production, immigration. And lastly is regions. We're going to go over regions in a minute because there are many different types of regions. So how might common geographic characteristics help us understand this place? How can the place be divided into regions, and to what regions does the place belong? So are there any questions on these 5 themes of geography, what they might represent, what are their applications in the real world, anything at all? All right, I don't see anything, so we can go ahead and move on. Be free to ask questions anytime during the presentation. All right, so firstly is landforms. Here are 2 maps with many different types of landforms, and we're going to go over them bit by bit. So you see here, this is a landform that shows the colder areas, and we're going to go over that in climate. The colder areas will generally have landforms such as mountains, glaciers. This is a mountain range in which multiple mountains are contained, a valley, which is generally a lower area in between 2 hills, a cascade, which is a water landform, a river, tributaries is where rivers split off into multiple parts, hills, which you see as a mound of land, plain is the flat part of land, estuaries, islands, oceans, cliffs, seafronts, and all of these other ones, as well as the ones over here like volcanoes and mesas and plateaus. that you see, and I'm sure you know about, that represent the different the physical geography of a place. So landforms can really, really affect the way a place works. So landforms, if a place has a lot of mountains and it's got a lot of like different, like really high mountains and mountain ranges, and it's got hills and valleys, then it's generally going to be a little bit more difficult to navigate. And some of those mountains can act as barriers for people to move across parts of land. Same thing with large plots of ocean, as we see. We have to use a boat or a plane to travel across oceans, and that's not necessarily possible with a car. So it's a little bit more difficult to travel across those kinds of boundaries. The last other ones we have is like plains, which is very flat areas of land. And these flat areas of land might be used for crops and for farming, which would also add to the human geography of a place. A plateau, someone just asked what a plateau is. A plateau is just a flat part of land, like it's raised and then it's just flat on top. So that's, you can see that right here in the picture. A delta is where the a water landform splits off into multiple parts. I encourage you to look over these at home and also just take a closer look at these diagrams. So I'll let you guys take a couple minutes to look at these diagrams and ask any questions you may have about what exactly it means or how exactly it's significant. Ooh, a strait. Straits are very, very important. So straits are narrow areas of water that are closed in by two areas of land. And one really, really big example of that is called the Bering Strait, which is all the way up in Alaska, Alaska and Russia. So it separates Alaska and Russia. And it's a fun fact that Alaska is the topmost point of Alaska is only 1 mile away from Russia, and that is stopped by the Bering Strait. As some people know, it might have melted over time. So straits are very important as they allow movement between continents. Yeah. All right. Any other questions about these landforms, what they might mean, how they might change human geography of a place? All right, I don't see anything more, so we can go ahead and continue. I see a couple. I see. Oh, someone asked, are these images downloadable for you to study yourself? Absolutely, I can send them out, but these pictures are also available in text, in like geography textbooks. They are available on Google too. You can go ahead and search up different kinds of landforms and you'll come up with a lot of great diagrams, that show you all the different types of landforms, and feel free to go ahead and search up like definitions for them as well. What I think is really helpful in learning about all your different types of landforms is looking up real life examples of them. So if you're learning about straits, go ahead, search up the Bering Strait and learn about it so that you can better understand why that sort of landform is significant, how it was formed, and you'll generally just find a lot more information with real world examples. All right. And someone asked, are there subdivisions of landforms, like more specific canyons? Like, yes, there are many subdivisions of landforms, as we can see here. Canyons do have different types, but that's a little more in depth than you're going to need to know for this course. What you need to know here is just very basic stuff. Alluvial fans are very similar to deltas. They're where water. I think where is there an alluvial fan here? Yeah, an alluvial fan is all the way in the back right here. If you can see my cursor, and it's a water feature that just opens up. All right. Let's see if there are any other questions. A relief collapse is similar to a cliff. So it's a large area of land, usually where there's a hill or some other sort of mound feature that just drops off suddenly into a plain area. All right. Any other questions about landforms? All right. I think I've got one more. Let's see. Sounds are areas of water near a peninsula usually, and they're very shallow areas of water. Seafronts as well. Where are the seafront? I'm looking for the seafront on the map. Just 1 minute, please. All right. So yeah, we went over sounds. Sounds are that shallow area of land. Seafronts are some other. The sea is also another name for an ocean. So it's like a salted body of water, and it's going to be around like this area right here, where it meets land. All right. So I encourage you, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and look those up. Look at a map. Look at for real life examples of these, and we're going to go ahead and continue on. So there's some further things about landforms, and they are solid features formed on the Earth's crust and bodies of water. So crustal movements and other tectonic activity, which we're going to go over in a second, create landforms like mountains, faults, sinks, volcanoes. So many landforms are shaped by water and wind that carve and erode land surfaces. So they carry and deposit soil, sand, and other debris. So we know about weathering, erosion, deposition, and that is what causes landforms. Now for Earth's layers. Earth's layers are also very important in understanding the Earth's landforms. So here's a quick diagram of the Earth's layers that I encourage you to look at. Just take a look at it for a couple minutes. You can see here that this section is to scale, this section is not to scale. And we know that there are a few main layers of the Earth. So there's the inner core, the outer core, the mantle, and the crust. So we see here they've called it by their more specific scientific names, which is the lithosphere, crust, and the uppermost solid part of the mantle. The mantle, which is the top part of the mantle, is called the asthenosphere, and then you have the inner and outer core. The inner core would be solid, and the outer core is a liquid. And the inner core is solid because of all the pressure that builds up to cause that inner core to become a solid unit. All right. Take a look at this, and if you have any questions, if you don't have any questions, we can go ahead and continue on to plate tectonics. I'll give you guys a couple minutes. Right now it's 5:22, so at 5:24 we can move on. Just make sure you're taking note of this because this is a very important part of physical geography. All right, sorry about that. It's my Wi-Fi just went out for 1 minute. So let me go ahead and get back to sharing my screen. All right, so this was the Earth's layers. I don't believe anyone has any questions on this anymore, so I can go ahead and close that. All right, so now here is some tectonic plates, which is what I wanted to talk about next. I just want to get some pictures up. So these are the different tectonic plates that you're going to need to know about, and they're going to come up often on tests and quizzes for world geography. Someone asked, is there hard evidence about the layers? And I would say not necessarily hard evidence. We do have some pretty solid evidence about the layers, and they will definitely show up on a world geography quiz or test. So I suggest definitely keeping them in mind, learning about them as well. So here are tectonic plates that are very important to know. Tectonic plates are areas where parts of the lithosphere, so parts of this lithosphere crust and the uppermost solid mantle, have split apart using these different types of boundaries. Let me go ahead and show the different types of boundaries. It's a bit of a blurry picture, but these are plate boundaries. So these are the tectonic plates of the lithosphere and the asthenosphere right under, and you can see it moves up in that fountain-like shape to cause a divergent plate boundary. Divergent means it's pulling apart at either side, and a convergent means it's coming together. Usually there are different types of convergent plate boundaries. Convergent plate boundaries can often come together and move upwards like that, or one can go under the other, which is called subduction. There is the last type of plate boundary, which is called transform, which it moves one against the other, sort of like that. And you can see that in the diagram as well. Which one is the most common? So I would say the most common plate boundary is a convergent plate boundary, as there are two different types of it, and it happens very, very, very often. All right. So let's look back at our plates, and these are very, very important. You're going to need to know this for every early quiz or test. So someone asked how many tectonic plates are there, and here's a picture for you to see how many tectonic plates exist. So the one we're currently in is the North American plate, and you can see here there's arrows indicating the subduction, transform boundaries. This one's a divergent boundary. These are convergent boundaries, convergent, some more divergent ones. And you can see here that this is a famous transform boundary off the coast of California, a convergent boundary there as well. And there are some convergent boundaries in the ocean, so like the Nazca Plate, South American, Antarctic, such things. So I encourage you to go ahead, take a look at this, and sort of get a feel of where all these different plates are and what the kind of boundaries are. So we know that the ones coming together are convergent, going apart, divergent, and going against each other is transform. So take a look at that and think about it for a minute. I'm going to ask, how do tectonic plates cause earthquakes? We're going to look at that in just 1 second. I see I've got some questions here. So what does the transform plate mean? Okay, let's look back at our plate boundaries, which is right here. Transform plate boundaries go against each other. One moves up and the other moves down. The oceans, yes, oceans do have plates in them as well. So someone asked, how does someone memorize all of the plates? So that's gonna be a little bit harder to do, to memorize every single one of the places. Just look at this map and think about, okay, this plate is here, and especially since your maps are going to be changing, you're going to have different projections, and the maps are going to look different, and so your plates are going to look different. It's going to be really hard to memorize if you look at it that way. So what I find is really easy to memorize your plates. I know some teachers for world geography do ask you to memorize them. Other ones ask you to just get a feel of where they are. But it's best to know to memorize them, to know where they are for the sake of a test. You're not entirely sure how your teacher is going to conduct that test. So the best way to memorize them is to understand your maps. So you know that this is Europe and Asia, so you can understand that is the Eurasian plate. Africa, Arabia, the Arabian plate and the African plate, Australian, Indian, South American. Those things are one factor to memorizing your different tectonic plates. And one more thing is thinking about plate boundaries. So landforms will occur at those plate boundaries, like the mountains, like the Himalaya Mountains, which is right here between the Eurasian and Indian plate. And you can tell the difference there. You say, oh, I know the Himalaya Mountains are right here, so that must mean there's a plate boundary there, which means there are two different plates here. And since this is India, and since that's Eurasia, I know that those are the different plates. Same thing here, you have the San Andreas Fault in California, and you know that's the North American plate, and that is the, I believe that's the Juan de Fuca plate that causes that, Juan de Fuca and Pacific plate that causes that sort of transform boundary. All right, I've got some questions here. That's how someone would memorize all the plates. Oh, someone says my screen share is not working. Can you see the plate boundary now? Yes, the Antarctic does have plates, which is right at the bottom, the Antarctic plate right there. Some people are asking how tectonic plates cause earthquakes, which is a really good thing. It's not necessarily required for world geography, but it's a fun thing to know about. So here's some. Here we go. This is a tectonic plate that shows seismic activity. Right, so here is the epicenter of an earthquake. Some important earthquake vocab to know is epicenter is the above ground point where an earthquake starts, and the focus is the below ground point where an earthquake starts. So transform boundaries are usually where earthquakes would occur, but it can generally occur near any plate boundary. This specific one, it's a transform boundaries. You can see one goes up, the other goes down. And this is the up thrown block, the down thrown block. And what usually happens at a transform boundaries, you can see in California, like the San Andreas Fault, is a fault line, which is just a rift between two areas of land. You can see that fault scrap right there, which looks like a little cliff of area where there's a difference between the elevation of land. I believe there's a different one right here. And so you can see just different parts of an earthquake. You don't necessarily need to know about all the waves, but the epicenter and focus or hypocenter. See, you can see that tectonic plates right there and the crust or lithosphere. And one more important thing to know that you will need to know for geography is the ring of fire. So the ring of fire is an area where the Pacific plate, so let's go back to the plates, where the Pacific plate meets the, hold on. Yeah, where the Pacific plate would, finding it hard to switch tabs, hold on 1 minute. Pacific plate meets the Nazca plate and the South American plate, and it also goes along Filipino, Juan de Fuca, the North American plate, and that's where it's called the Ring of Fire because there are so many volcanoes there. So along that entire line, there are volcanoes and subduction zones, and these subduction zones are going to create something called trenches, which are the deepest part of the ocean, and it's just these landforms that are formed by these tectonic plate boundaries. So tectonic plates do play a really big form in our physical geography and our landforms. So that's why it's called a ring of fire, because of all the volcanoes that are there. All right. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. That's Earth's layers, some plate tectonics, and now time for climate and weather. So what is the difference between weather and climate? So weather is usually what happens for one day, and climate is an overall or the typical weather pattern for an area. So say climate for a place like Texas. Texas would have a generally like hot, humid climate, but my weather today may be really cold and really rainy, or really cold and really dry. So weather does not necessarily reflect the climate, as a climate is just overall over a long period of time. So the people who study climate are called climatologists, and the people who study weather are called meteorologists. So you can see short term, long term is generally the big difference between weather and climate. And what is one thing similar between them is they're both map temperature, and they have maps and precipitation patterns. So weather also takes control of the wind speed, and climate is the average conditions of a place. So those are the main things you need to know about weather and climate. But the number one thing about weather and climate is that weather is short term, climate is long term. All right. Here are some factors affecting climate. And in my world geography class, this is exactly what you will need to know. This is the exact stuff you'll need to know about factors affecting climate, LACE MOPS. That is the term that we are going to use for that, the little acronym. So L would be latitude. So we know if we want to go back to our slide, hold on, let me find the slide, latitude and longitude. So if we look at this, we see lines of latitude, the equator, and I said earlier that when you get closer to the equator, the temperature usually gets hotter. And that is because of the areas that are closer to the equator are always going to be near the sun. So let's see, I think there is what causes day and night? Right here, you can see the direct sunlight during the different parts of the year. And you can see in every single one of these diagrams, there is quite a bit of sun on the equator. So as you get further from the equator, the Arctic and Antarctic Circle are usually always blue in these, which means they're usually going to be cold year round. So latitude really does affect the climate of a place. So let's go back to weather and climate. Air masses. So air masses are also important. There are air currents, which we're not going to be going over right now, but air currents do affect these things. Continentality, which are the different continents and the plate tectonics of the area. Elevation. So we know that the tops of mountains, the absolute top of a mountain, is going to be much colder than the lower area, and you can see that in areas such as the Himalayas. So mountain barriers. Again, we can talk about the Himalaya mountains, and those mountain barriers are generally going to cause differences in the climate because of the big changes in temperature and pressure and air pressure that they have. Ocean currents can also affect the climate of an area because of the temperatures that they move around, and we can look at a diagram of ocean currents in just a minute. Pressure cells, which is the air pressure in different areas, can also affect the climate of an area, as well as storms, such as thunderstorms, rainstorms, like natural disasters such as tsunamis and things like that. So all those can affect the climate of a place. So you can take a look at this for a minute, and I can pull up a picture of ocean currents. So here is a picture of ocean currents. Let me make it a little bit bigger. It's not a very clear picture, but you can see that the red ones are where heat is moving. The ones that are in black are just generally circulating the ocean, and then the blue ones are cold water. So that's why waters near California are generally going to be cooler than waters that are near Florida or Texas. All right. So I'll let you take a look at this one for one more second. Just think about those ocean currents, look at the colors and which ones are hot, which ones are cold, and then we can start moving on. Here as well is another example of a continentality, which shows the range in temperature in certain areas. And this one is showing you the northern part, which is the US, Canada parts of North America. So you can take a look at that. The red areas are going to be hotter and lower temperatures. So this is the median values of these areas. This is the annual temperature range. So it's the differences in temperature. Yes, black means the medium temperature. The thing here, what they're showing in the key is not the heat of Alaska. They're showing the difference in temperature in Alaska. So that means Alaska could have a slightly hot temperatures and really, really cold temperatures, and it's mostly because of those extremely cold temperatures that Alaska has a really dark red spot right there. And you can see in the lower Texas area, the Florida area, there's very little difference in temperature, which means it is hot most of the year, and that doesn't change a lot. Go ahead and move on. So part 3 would be politics and people. So let's get started on that. This is the human geography section, by the way. How do you determine how hot or cold an area is? That is generally the area's general climate. So as we can see here, annual temperature ranges are based on the data this is the median value, which means it's the median of all the data that's been collected over the years of a year's high and low temperature. So that goes right back into weather and climate. So we have here, back to our human geography, reading population charts. So population charts are super, super important because they represent the development of a nation and because people in the country represent the country. So if there are a lot of people in your country, it's going to be a bigger country with usually a larger economy. And if it's a very small country, it'll have a very mellow economy, might not be very largely manufacturing based. So these are useful for studying the future of a region as well as examining historical and current trends in population. So you can see here in this population chart specifically, we have a difference between female and male, and you can see female is in green and male is in blue. And rapid growth in a developing country like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is in Africa, would be, as you can see, the younger people tend to live longer, and if people go into older age, they live for a lesser amount of time. We can also see slower growth in a developed country by like the United States, and we see that people tend to, it looks almost like a rectangle. People tend to live like an equal amount of time on either side. We can see that women in older age tend to live longer than men. We also have negative growth, which is in areas like Germany, which is a very developed area. And we can see that there tend to be a lot longer lines in the top of the population graph, which means that there are a lot more older people living in Germany than younger people. All right. The percentages on the bottom mean like differences in lifespan. Let's move on. This is another population chart, forecasted population age 60 and over in the US. Keep in mind the one in this slide is the ones you're likely going to be seeing on a test or a quiz in your world geography class. But this one is also a good representation of the different types of people living in the US and the predictions that you can make from learning about population. Now on to the politics, which is the types of government. So types of government, you're going to have the main two types are the federal and unitary government. So federal government will have two levels of government, which is the central government and the states government, and the unitary government will only have one level of government, which is a central government or a national government. And you can already see kind of the direction this is going to take with people having a lot of power in a unitary government rather than a more democratic sort of government where it's going to be split in a federal government. So political powers are shared in federal government by two levels, and political powers held by the central government only in the unitary government. And federal government has a rigid and codified constitution and a flexible constitution, the unitary government, which means the person in charge can change the laws of the country however they would want, which is not necessarily the best thing for a citizen. Federal government also has two different types of law, and the unitary government will have one type of law in total. So the pros and cons of unitary and federal governments. So unitary system, promotes national unity, but public policies do not fit the needs of the entire country or population. And generally, there's a lot of unifying of power, the concentration of power that's going to be happening in a unitary government that allows one person in charge to take over the entire country, which, as we all know, is not necessarily a good thing. Federal system is good for very large and culturally diverse countries like the U.S. And a con is that conflict between federal and state government can happen, conflicting and competing laws in this government. All right, here are some more specific types of government, like totalitarianism, which can also be called a dictatorship sometimes, which just gives a person total governmental control. Authoritarianism has a micromanagement of citizens via a government structure, which is also like a military control and like a tyranny, where they have control over every aspect of people's lives. A monarchy, which is a rule of one, undivided rule, typically hereditary and backed by oligarchical power. A monarchy has many different types, a couple different types of monarchy, which is an absolute monarchy, which was outlawed by the Magna Carta, which King John signed back in the 1300s, I believe. Um, and then there's a type of divided monarchy, which is what we would see in countries like Great Britain, where there's the queen, but the parliament holds more of the power than the queen does. There's also an oligarchy, which is a rule of a few people. So a group of elites will usually rule an oligarchy. And a republic is indirect rule of citizens through representatives, so rule of law, limited government. That's kind of what you'll see in the government of the U.S., where people are allowed to vote. There is a popular vote, but there is an electoral college through which the vote goes. Direct democracy is rule of citizens. So there's a simple majority rule and there's no restraint on majority. So a direct democracy would be something where it is just the perfect rule of citizens, something similar to our voting situation if we took out the electoral college. So if the popular vote was exactly what would be the deciding vote. And an anarchy is no order, no control, no government structure, and it's just a vacuum of power. All right. So here is another chart on who has the power. And one more important thing that we see here is a theocracy. So theocracy is where religion is very heavily involved in the government. So people believe that the ruler is a god or that the religious leaders should run the government. And often the ruler has a dictator-like power. The second type of monarchy we see is a constitutional monarchy, like we see in England, as mentioned. So we also see examples of this right here. So dictatorship would be places like Cuba, Pakistan, Syria under Assad. And an oligarchy would be places like China, usually referred to as a communist nation. Theocracy would be a place like Iran, or they say North Korea as well in this document. Absolute monarchy, Saudi Arabia. King or queen has limited power in constitutional monarchy, which is England. A direct democracy has a few small places around the world, not enough to be very notable. And importantly is the representative democracy or the republic democracy. So that be England, Germany, Mexico, USA, and India. So when you're talking about politics, it's also important to understand the boundaries between different countries. So one type of boundary is called an antecedent, which is a pre-existing boundary that corresponds to a physical feature. Like we saw way back in our map. Let me see if I can go back to our tectonic plates map right here. Right here is the Himalayan mountains between Eurasia and India, and that is a natural boundary that separates India and the rest of Eurasia. So that would be called an antecedent boundary between country A and country B. A subsequent boundary would be set after the settlements of different groups meet, and they often correspond to their respective ecumene, which means that people in power decide that this is the boundary, this is the difference between these different places. We also have the superimposed boundary between country A and country B, where the boundary is imposed by an outside force or treaty, and that does not necessarily reflect the existing cultural landscape. There is also a relic, which is no longer a boundary after the outcome of physical changes, but there is still a political changes, sorry, but there's still a visible imprint on the landscape. So this would be after there is a boundary such as a subsequent boundary, which usually is a subsequent boundary that is overshadowed by something else, and that subsequent boundary no longer stands between countries, and so it becomes a relic boundary. And the last part that we have just about 10 minutes to go over is the economic and the social part of it, which is going to cover urban geography as well. All right, let me see. Oh, someone asked if I can go back to the last slide. Oh, sorry, that's too far. Here you go. I'm sure these, I think this video will also be published on the website, so you can go ahead and take a look at that in order to get a better idea of all this if you do want to go back to it. Yes, some areas of Saudi Arabia are a result of superimposed boundaries. Think of any place that has a boundary on it because of a treaty. Go ahead and continue to the economic and social. So one more important thing is types of economic systems. So there are three types of main economy that we're going to be going over, which is traditional, command, and a market economy. So traditional economy would be like Australian, the indigenous people of Australia, and that is generally like a trading economy, a very settled down economy. So what people need to survive, like food, shelter, and tools, and goods are only produced by farming, hunting, and gathering, and people make their own share or trade. There is no like big manufacturing process going on there. A command economy would be a place like the old Soviet Union or Cuba. It would be produced when whatever would be produced that the government decides, goods would be produced however the government decides, and people will get the products however the government decides. This was also what happened in an absolute monarchy system, which was way back in England in the medieval days, which is what caused King John to sign that Magna Carta, and which is what caused the people to want a little bit more freedom. All right. And the market economy, lastly, would be Canada, the UK. Produce whatever the people are willing to buy and sell. Business owners determine the most effective legal methods of production and determined by how much a person is able or willing to pay. All right. And you can notice that there is a direct correlation with the types of government that we see. So the command economy is usually a totalitarian government, while the market economy we see more representative democracy or that democratic sort of government. Here are just a quick slide on resources. So we know our natural resources are renewable resources and our non-renewable resources. Just something you want to know, and I'm sure most of you already know this stuff. All right, urbanization. Before we get into urban geography, we want to learn what urbanization is. So urbanization is that population shift from rural to urban areas, so the corresponding decrease in the proportion of people living in rural areas and the ways in which societies adapt to this change. So we can see something like this in the Industrial Revolution. So before the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people in that Western Europe area were living on their own private farms. They had that sort of feudalist system where they were just farming under a lord. And then the Industrial Revolution came with a lot of manufacturing, and so people began to move to cities to work in that manufacturing, and the rest of the country came as such, where the economy shifted to a more manufacturing-based economy. A lot more people began to live in cities, more textiles began to manufacture, and generally the social aspect of the country also changed as a result of these people moving to urban areas. So as you can see, there's lots of stuff going on with urban geography. We've got marketing geography, economic geography, welfare, culture, quantitative geography, geography of housing, resource management, social geography. And you can see this is not necessarily all stuff that you need to know, but it just gives you sort of the idea of how much stuff really goes under urban geography. So you can see mortality, which is lifespan, basically. So labor markets, quality of life, which is how people live, representation, the cultural geography, availability of housing, social spatial structure, mobility, leisure, and tourism we see in the recreation geography. So these are all things that you're going to want to know. And lastly, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I can take any questions. And this is also some homework for you guys to do before next class. So these are big words that you're going to be learning about in human geography specifically. So these words are culture, language, family, ethnic group, culture, region, cultural diffusion, culture, hearth, globalization, connectivity, standard of living, outsourcing, and pandemic, which are all things you should know. I believe these slides and notes on the Kid Teach Kid website should be under the World Geography course. I'll make sure to double check and let you guys know. But for now, I think that checking the World Geography course you should be able to find these slides as well as a video of this class. All right, so are there any questions? Any questions at all? These terms are very, very important for the cultural, the human geography of a place. So it's important that you know them because they're going to be coming up a lot when you go later on in your course. All right, are there any questions at all? Said what is important? Continentality is the range in temperature. I can go back to the continentality slide if you want. So as for who named all the maps, it's usually the people who originally drew these maps and made these maps. That's who they're named after, like the Mercator projection, the Robinson projection. Let me go back to the continentality slide so you can look at it. I believe I picked a picture of that. There it is. There it should be. So continentality is the temperature range, and you can see that here where the red parts are the areas with the biggest range in temperature and the purple parts with the lowest range. The homework is just those definitions. I can go back to it for a minute if you want. We've got just about 2 more minutes. This is all the definitions that you should know. World Geography is not an AP class, but the Human Geography part of World Geography is an AP class. It's called AP Human Geography, and these terms are definitely really big parts of AP Human Geography, so things you should know. All right, I'm going to stay on the slide for a little minute, and if there are any questions you have, you can raise your hand. Make sure to keep your hand raised for a little bit, or ask them in the Q&A or the chat. If you want to review something discussed, I believe the recording of this class will be available in the World Geography tab on the Kid Teach Kid website. Are there any questions at all about the homework, about what we're going to be doing next class, any of the stuff that we went over this time? If not, thank you for coming, and I'll see you guys next week. Thank you guys for coming to the world geography class. The pre-calculus class will be starting in just a minute. It's going to start at, it's said it's going to start at 6 o'clock, but I'll give you 5 minutes to take a break if you would like to. And we can go ahead and start at 6:05. So I'll send a message in the chat and say that we will start.